what about if we move into faith and politics, the intersection of those two things? I'm wondering about what you might have thoughts on that, either personally or publicly, in terms of politics, whether it's about Catholic education, Catholic healthcare, social services, or even the recent controversy that we saw about the Canada Summer Jobs Program. How does or how should politics in general factor into the job of being a bishop? I think Bishop Grandin, you look like you have an idea.
Well, no, the way you phrase the question is interesting. I don't think we would readily sort of think that in our role as bishops that we need to be engaging in the politics of the country, but that's one thing that I've kind of learned. It's an area that is important. That being said, I don't know if we're well prepared for that. And so sometimes I believe we might be a little reticent, at least I am sometimes, when we feel that we're not as familiar with this particular sphere of dialogue, engagement. And then when you add the media, not Grandin, but when you add the media into that factor, it can become a polarizing reality where there isn't this ability to dialogue about issues that are affecting society, and that the Church legitimately has the concern for the dignity of the human person, as Archbishop Smith said, and has a voice to speak, often on the ones who are marginalized, who are voiceless, and therefore we should have an important role in public debate. I also remember, you know, and this is not a criticism of those that go into politics, but I think that there is a sense of vocation that should be there for those who accept this particular responsibility for the care of the common good. And I just hope that those personal choices that people are making to be engaged and to become political leader are motivated by those higher ideals, and that you then allow yourself to sort of go above this partisan kind of discussion, debate, whatever that might be, and are able to enter into that discussion themselves and be open to have faith leaders be part of that. And that's where I'm finding that I think some of the people in politics are really afraid of even inviting the voice of the Church. And that's, I think, to the detriment of society, that they are operating with that sense of fear. I don't think that we would if we were allowed to give that voice to those. I don't think we would be fearful or in any way, but that's a bit of a reflection, I guess, in that role. I didn't realize how much politics was going to play in taking on the role of being a bishop in the present culture and society of Canada right now.
And this at the same time as we like to boast as Canadians about how diverse our culture is. You're saying except when it comes to faith.
You know, politics and religion, politics has been described as the art of compromise. And certainly there are things that Christ is about where there really isn't any compromise. You know, when it comes to his vision and his call and his invitation into an eternity with him and his family. With persons and individuals, he certainly is always compassionate, and Pope Francis is doing such a good job of reminding us of this. For the individual, there's this attentive compassion. But at the same time, Christ is summoning us to something that is life or death. So, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't when it comes to religion and politics. The world of the social media realizes the capital of having a church leader, a bishop, say something that's controversial. This is we've got the story. And so there is this pressure, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But this is something that, when I say that, you know, Christ it's about life and death ultimately. And so what compromise is there between life and death, ultimately? This is something that the church, and we can forget this ourselves too as bishops, the church thinks in terms of eternity. So what cannot be articulated now, today, or this year, doesn't mean that it doesn't have an answer, that it doesn't have an articulation in the way Christ and his church journey through time into eternity. And of course that comes up against that now, quick, hey, push-button issues in the world of politics. So I think for bishops, what has been said by several of us here already, you know, it comes back to prayer and letting the Holy Spirit be the strategist and guide us in dealing with this. It's really, we're in two worlds, the world of politics, but we're speaking about Christ's call which is ultimately, as I said, life and death, or death.
Yeah, an interesting example of what you're saying, I think, was during the Alberta March after the Alberta March for Life. There was at least one journalist who thought it was somehow wrong to see Catholic school students at a March for Life. Whereas I think most of you around the table would think, well, maybe the opposite might be true.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't there.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the engagement of the church with the political world, I mean, it happens at a couple of different levels. So there's the level of immediacy. The church will always have to engage with the government of the day, right? Whether it's the national, provincial, municipal level. Now, operating out of that legitimate distinction between church and state, each has its own rightful autonomy and so on. But it's through politics and through the acts of parliaments or legislatures that law is formed, law that impacts our common life together, and significantly, I think, law teaches. Now, what we're finding in our country over the last little while is that the law is teaching as moral what we know, in fact, is immoral. So we have a legal vacuum with respect to abortion. We have a current federal government which continues to promote abortion wrongly as a right. And so a certain teaching in that realm of politics and law on that life issue is being communicated. We have the legalization of assisted suicide and euthanasia. And so people can interpret that particular legal teaching as saying that this is right and moral, when in fact we know that the opposite is true. And what happens coming out of these legal determinations is it impacts the life of our families, it impacts their mindset and therefore their behavior, and is causing great havoc and damage. And therefore the church does have a responsibility to engage that political world with the gospel, with the truth, with the moral law, and so on and so forth. So we have no choice but to engage. I think, though, too, there's a deeper level in which we've got to engage politics, and that's at the level of culture. We've learned from St. John Paul II that politics follows culture, and therefore we need to be evangelizing culture with the good news of the gospel such that politics will follow. So we saw that in dramatic fashion with the fall of communism, where it was precisely through the power of an evangelized culture that all of those walls came down. And so in the longer term view, we have as a responsibility, what in fact we've always had as a responsibility as a church, and that's the transformation of the culture with the message of the gospel. And it's a challenge, you know, not to get so bombarded and overwhelmed, I guess is the word I'm looking for, with the immediate, that we forget this longer term, deeper engagement that has to take place. So I would see it on both of those levels.
There are obstacles, though, to speaking out both as bishops and as
Sure.
people just in the pews or on the street, those of us who want to engage in politics, there are some obstacles and fears involved, aren't there?
Well, and there are many, and I hear that a lot from our people. It's interestingly, most from young adults. They want to be witnesses, they want to engage, but if they find themselves in particularly, say, a university setting, which can be especially allergic or inimical to the gospel, they'll find themselves bombarded with all sorts of insults or name calling or whatever if they stand up for who they are as Catholics. But this is something that's always been with us. St. Paul said to the early leaders of the church and to all of us, you preach the truth in season and out of season. And in fact, it goes back to Jesus himself. He made a promise. You can expect this. He says, if the world hated me, it's going to hate you too. But the issue is, really, have I personally been touched with the truth and the beauty of Jesus Christ and who he is? Am I living out of the wonder of how everything changes when I encounter this man, the Son of God made flesh? And when I am animated by that conviction, yeah, there's going to be obstacles, and yes, they're going to be painful, and yes, I'd rather not have them. But how can I do otherwise than speak the truth, and speak this experience that I've had, because from deep down we know that the hope and the life and the meaning for which every human heart seeks is only found in this person, John Paul II. Jesus Christ is the answer to the question that is every human life. That's what animates us. And if people don't like that answer, I'm still going to keep giving it until finally, okay, maybe there's something to this,
One of my favorite sayings of Pope Francis is that the Church should be known for what it stands for as opposed to what it stands against. I think it's helpful, is this in our context, is this the intersection of politics, of faith, of science, whatever it may be, is this that the Catholic Church has always tried to build up the community. So when we look at our education system, whether it's schools or universities, well, it's the Catholic Church that comes forward with that, for centuries and already. Catholic healthcare or providing healthcare for all of our citizens, and the Catholic Church continues to be the largest provider of healthcare within the entire world. Looking for those that need help to put food on the table, a roof over their head, love within their hearts, and for each other through Catholic social services. The Church always builds up, and so we're true partners as Canadians. As bishops, we're first and foremost Canadian citizens. We engage in society and the issues of the day, and as faith leaders right now, it's important for us to as a church and as individuals to speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. The impoverished, those in need, those whose voice has been robbed from them. So I think that's, if we can work together, all people, all faiths, all walks of life, we can build, continue to build a better society for all people.
Do you think we ordinary Catholics really understand the patrimony that we have here in terms of, as you say, the education, social services, health care?
I think in our hearts that we do, but one of the
that
challenges as Canadians we're too polite. So we'll complain in our hearts and in our homes and amongst family over coffee, but it's hard for us to engage and to make our voices heard. We can do better.
We don't blow our horn very loudly. And I think when that statue was put of the sister on the legislature grounds, really saying that in the birth and growth of this province of Alberta, religious women made a significant contribution, especially in education and health care, before the government felt any responsibility for any of this. Here were church bodies, and we could say, I'm sure, about other churches as well. Religious people have believed in the salvific impact of health and education in the growth and development of human beings. And so the church has been there for a long time doing this, And but we don't blow our horn very loudly. I was in on a conversation recently where a parishioner in my diocese came up to me and said, "Your Grace, you know, why don't we tell people what we've been doing?" And I said, well, we just, I don't know if it's humility, we don't want to blow our own horn, but if we know the history, we know that Catholic organizations, religious people, have provided this for a long time, and the government, you know, and more secular institutions are really the Johnny-come-latelys who have said, well, we'll take care of this now. And in many instances, this is lost. I just came from visiting one of my northern communities in High Level, and the first school that was put together in High Level was put together by two sisters of service. One of them, Sister Florence McDougall, there's now a school, it's a public school, named Florence McDougall School. When they went there, they said especially, we don't want to open a Catholic school, we want to open a public school so that everybody will feel that they are deserving of the education that we can provide. And so that is a public school. There's no Catholic school in High Level, but there's a public school named after this nun who was the first educator in High Level. Amazing, really. Yeah.
Got any political problems up north?
Well, I'm pretty naive when it comes to politics, but I'm of the opinion that anytime you have an idea and you're trying to convince somebody else of your idea, you're being political. So I think the church has not only the right but the obligation to be political in the world, because we've got some important ideas, and politics are at play in the parish, in the diocese, and all around us. I think what makes the church different and what we have to offer is that when we look at the political discourse today, it really, so much of it comes down to sound bites and headlines and populism, and just trying to convince just enough people to be on your side. But what the church has is not good for a majority of people. We believe that it's good for all people. I think where we need to be most politically active, though, is to make sure that our Christian lives match our message. And it goes back to the Acts of the Apostles, when they said, look at how they love one another. Those must be those Christians over there. So if we can make sure that our parishes, our presence in the communities really reflect what we say is the gospel, then we don't have to put up billboards. People will look at our lives and they'll be attracted to our message, and they'll see in that truth that there's a different way to live. And so for me, that's a very political, countercultural act.